Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of the Edgar Wright Director Podcast series, where we're talking about the films of Edgar Wright. We just watched Hot Fuzz, the second film after Shaun of the Dead. What did you think of Hot Fuzz, Victor?
It was super cool.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it a lot.
So, we saw Hot Fuzz when it was in theaters.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's the best fucking movie ever at the time.
Yeah.
Like, I liked it more than Shaun of the Dead the first time I saw it. And I don't think so much now. Mostly because Hot Fuzz, I mean, I still love it, don't get me wrong. But I don't think it stands up to multiple watchings the way Shaun of the Dead does. Because a lot of the fun the first time you saw Hot Fuzz was that the twists were totally out of left field, you know? Like, you really felt like he was putting together the suspense thriller. You're like, oh man, is it going to be the Skinner guy? Like, what's going on? He puts together all these plot threads, and then when you find out, oh, they're just killing these people because they're like, a blight on the neighborhood, then it's kind of like, you know, it was a big shock, and then you see it again, and you know what's happening.
But it was still super cool.
Yeah, what's great about it is that they laced it with a lot of ironies, like dramatic ironies that if you've seen the movie, you get why they're saying that.
And all the little lines. Everything in the movie has a purpose, and it all comes back. And that's
even if the purpose is completely stupid.
Every little line serves some purpose in the grand scheme of things.
It's definitely the kind of movie that's tightly constructed in that way, where, like, you know, someone drops a line about their aunt, and then, you know, 10 scenes later, the aunt shows up with a gun. It's Chekhov's gun, which is the concept that if you mention a gun on the wall in one scene, that gun better go off in the next scene. Yeah. And the movie is full of Chekhov's guns.
Absolutely loaded with it.
And even more guns. I feel like they went, you know what, we've got a movie full of guns. Let's put a bunch of Chekhov's guns in there as well. But no, I mean, Edgar Wright is known for that. Shaun of the Dead had a lot of it too. There's a lot of, you know, dramatic irony and lines that are important for later. Yeah, it's a big fun movie with lots of clever writing that when you watch it again you go, oh, I know what he's talking about there, you know. So, and it's funny because if you know what's gonna happen, it all still makes sense. Like, you're watching it and you don't feel like the mystery came out of nowhere, kind of. Like, if you watch it again,
they do all the little hints at it in the dialogue,
right?
That you don't catch the first time.
It's sort of like the movie uses the Skinner guy as a red herring, because even though you can obviously tell that whatever he's saying, you're like, okay, the fact that he's acting so obviously conspicuous means that you're thinking, okay, well, he's probably not going to be the villain, right? But at the same time, drawing your attention to his conspicuous dialogue distracts you from the innocuous dialogue that just seems to be going on that actually is the real hints of what's going on, you know? When you hear the people complain about the reporter and how he makes all these typos, how he got their ages wrong, and then it turns out that's why they killed him. So it just seemed like they were just saying shit, but then in the end it's like, oh, they killed him for that stuff. So you already knew the motive, you just didn't think it was the motive, whereas Skinner had the obvious throw you off motive. So it's interesting in that
there was a conspiracy from the part where the actors get murdered and then people are driving by and they're like, oh, those people are dead, and it's like, how did anyone know that?
Right.
And it wasn't just Skinner, it was the one before too. It was like everyone.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's dropping subtle hints, but they're purposely misdirecting you to, you pay attention to stuff that you think, oh, that's obviously not going to be important, but you pay attention to it because they draw your attention to it. And the stuff that doesn't seem to be important is. To talk on a more broader scale, this movie's obviously a send-up of both mystery movies, detective movies, and cop movies, with major references to Bad Boys 2 and Point Break. And it's interesting to note that, like, again, just like with Shaun of the Dead, this is not really a parody. Yeah. It's just a
homage.
Well, it's a cop movie that is self-aware, you know, because it's not that, well, if this was just an homage or just a send-up, then it would just happen to occur that Simon Pegg comes into town and, you know, blows everyone away. It would be funny because it's like, oh, they're doing the cop drama thing in a small town, and it just happens to be this big, extravagant Hollywood shootout mess. But interestingly enough, it doesn't just happen that way by accident. He literally watches Bad Boys 2 and Point Break and then goes, you know what? I'm going to reenact those movies. Yeah. So rather than being like a a parody. Like, the film's not really a parody so much as the character goes out of his way to recreate Bad Boys 2 and Point Break, which is interesting.
Because he had to embrace the fun side of his job.
Right. He had to, like, it wasn't so much they had to learn to switch off as... Yeah. That's like the sort of...
They said they take himself less seriously.
Right. There's like a character study element to the movie, but it's odd because, I don't know, like he's a great character. Nicholas Angel and Danny are both great characters. Danny's like super earnest. He just wants to be a good cop, and you get the sense that he legitimately just doesn't understand what he's supposed to be doing. Like he would be a great cop if it weren't for the fact that he's been coddled by his dad and is just in this weird town, you know. But he has potential that is just lost under his lack of knowledge, his ignorance. He's ignorant, but eventually he'll become a good cop. Whereas Nick Angel is cool because, you know, he's the extreme personality, the I am the super best at everything I do. But, you know, it gets in the way of his everyday life. But what's funny is they never really deal with that. He never has to, like, really... He does learn to take himself less seriously, but he doesn't, like...
He broke the plant.
Yeah, he does break the plant.
That was his turning point.
Think?
Yeah. I was like, obvious symbolism there. He breaks his precious plant over the guy's face. That was him changing, because he had put the plant before his girlfriend or whatever. The plant was all the symbolism.
I don't know. I didn't think he really changed much after breaking the plant.
No, he did. That's where he goes, oh shit just got real, and then all that other shit happens.
Maybe. I could see it possibly as an interpretation. Yeah, I do like the sort of I can't turn off thing. Yeah. Because that was very relatable to me because of the fact that I'm often told that I can't turn off analysis. Like... That word is haunting me now, because I didn't used to call myself an analyst, per se. I was just a guy who writes... I called myself a blogger most of the time, because I was writing a blog, but it's funny, because I've gotten so used to using the word, and people call me the word, and then my girlfriend, Ashley, she will... Or Cookie Cutter, rather, since we're on the internet. Cookie will often tell me, like, you know... that I analyze everything, because I'll be sitting there watching stuff and just constantly spouting out analytical points about it, and she's like, why can't you just stop that sometimes? And I'm like, I can't. I have no off switch. I have to analyze all the time. And it reminded me of him, how everything to him is police work. It's, oh, this guy, why is he carrying himself that way? Could it be that he's a criminal? You know, like, what in the world around me relates back to my job?
I think the best part about him was that he wasn't a jackass. He was a good guy.
Right,
Who did want to have fun, but he just takes his job very seriously.
Yeah, and that's why I don't really think he changes so much as embrace, like he... Because there wasn't anything to change. He was not wrong in being the way he was. It's just, this was the kind of character he was. So I don't think it was really necessary for him to change. It might have been necessary for him to learn to liven up just a little bit so he could, you know, not be so stressed. But... Yeah. He really didn't need to change.
That is kind of the twisted message in it, is that the whole time it's like his arc is that he needs to, like, relax and sort of not be that super cop, but then he was right in the end. So it's like, well, that kind of, you know, defeats his arc to have him be right.
That's the point. That's why it's this mystery, because, like, the whole idea is that everything... It's really, I guess, a movie about sticking to... Not really sticking to your worldview, but about, like... Because the town is trying to break him. Yeah. Like, the whole movie is about this town and its opposite worldview of his, trying to break him and correct him and make him part of the society. And it's sort of like everyone's telling him, turn your brain off. And he's saying, I can't do that. Yeah. And I feel like the movie is also telling you not to turn your brain off. You know, like, it's telling you that if you just give in... and become like a mindless drone of society, then the people behind the scenes will rule. You know, they will bring about whatever they see fit. Yeah. So if you just sit back and let other people have control over your life and never question anything, you're going to be living in this kind of society where they're just killing people. You know, they're judge, jury, and executioner. And of course, the movie plays it up to be absurd, where they're killing people for loitering in the street because they want to win the Best Town Award. You know, it's an absurd way of presenting a somewhat real message of, you know, don't be sheep, think for yourself, question what's going on in the world around you. And so ultimately it's like, and if you tied this back into society, it's like everyone will always tell you to just get over it, you know? It, again, relatable for me as someone who people are often telling me, like, oh, you're overanalyzing it. Oh, why don't you just sit back and enjoy it? And I'm like, because then they can do whatever they want to me. Like, if I just sit back and enjoy every show that comes on with no critical thought, then they can feed me whatever show they want, and I'll buy it up, Whereas if I have critical thought, I can, pervade, so...
It's also about him accepting himself.
Right.
Because he started to doubt himself about, because when his girlfriend breaks up with him, he's starting to think, oh, maybe I'm like this horrible super cop, and that's all I am.
Definitely.
And then throughout, they're trying to tell him that he's basically being a dick, and then he's like...
Yeah, it's like...
And then he's about to give up, and then it turns out he was right.
If everyone keeps telling you that you're wrong, it starts to break you. Yeah. But in the end, he was correct. And, yeah, so it's really a movie about saying, like, don't necessarily listen to... Just because the world says you're wrong about something doesn't mean you're necessarily wrong.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it also tells you, but that doesn't mean you need to completely stay the same person. He does have a little bit of an arc in that he doesn't take himself seriously. And in the end, he's like, you know what? Fuck going back to London. Yeah. I'm going to stay out here and just sort of...
relax a little bit more.
Like, ease some of the tension. I feel like there could have even been, like, more to his arc of just showing that he was just trying to, become a calmer... less stressed out person or whatever, but yeah, it's also a bromance between him and the guy, which of course is because it's a buddy cop, so they got to play up that aspect too. It's interesting because the fight scenes in this movie, like the big action scene, what's so great about it is the whole movie is kind of like a big payoff, It's like every single thing it sets up throughout the movie all pays off in the last third in this huge epic action scene. And what's so fun about it is that it's a big Hollywood-style action scene in a shitty little, backwoods town in fucking England. That's half the joke. And that it's all these old people, fighting and shit like that. But it's shot like a big Hollywood action movie. Yeah. And it's funny because I love most of what happens in the action scenes, but I kind of hate the way they're shot because the film is deliberately trying to be Michael Bay.
Yeah.
It's deliberately playing up.
It's trying to do that.
Quick
make
cuts.
it seem like there's way more happening than there actually is.
Right.
But it's funny because I actually just shot a scene like that for my TV production because there was a fight scene and it's really short, and so I shot it from 2 different angles and had it switch back and forth like that pretty much.
Oh god.
And so it came out really cool because that's what you have to do when you have like a very simple fight,
I hope
like
it's not
simple
as bad.
Action scene.
I gotta tell you about there's this scene.
I mean, it's not chaos like that.
No, I told you about this scene before, but I gotta tell the podcast. The show Once Upon a Time is a lot of people listening, if anyone's listening, have probably heard of it because it's kind of popular on Tumblr. It's like it's a show about all these old fantasies, like all the stuff that's adapted by Disney and stuff in a TV show. And it's a complicated plot that I won't get into, but there's one scene where Prince Charming is fighting this guy, and it's a sword fight. And it takes place on this horrible green screened backdrop of like they're just in the mountains. It looks like Skyrim. And it's just him fighting this guy, and they're sword fighting back and like they're slashing at each other. But every single time one of them slashes, the camera cuts back to the other person. So it's literally like ha ha ha, and the camera keeps cutting back and forth constantly. I could not tell what the fuck was going on, and it goes on for like 30 seconds. It's like a whole this long ass exchange of them going back and forth and the camera cutting back and forth. I started to die. I honestly began to lose my life watching that scene. It was the worst action scene I've ever seen in anything ever. So yeah, Once Upon a Time, not a bad show. At least season 1 was pretty good, but that scene was awful. Hot Fuzz, though, is paying homage to Michael Bay, and it's funny because we would all consider Michael Bay awful for the most part, but at the same time, there is... you kind of have to sit back and go, well, yeah, it's paying homage to these big, dumb action movies, and from an intellectual standpoint, you go, oh, those movies are dumb. Why would you pay homage to them? But at the same time, you realize there is something to be enjoyed in those movies. There's a reason they're popular.
The awesomely bad aspect of it.
Like, yeah, like Bad Boys 2 is kind of awesome. So
yeah,
you can appreciate where they're coming from. It's very you know, Edgar Wright is definitely an authentic filmmaker. He definitely is someone who's going to show his likes on his sleeve, and he's going to go, yeah, maybe I do like big dumb action movies like fucking Point Break and Bad Boys 2. Why not send up to those? They're awesome, you know, in that two guys drinking beer and watching movies way.
Yeah.
Like, that's how those are meant to be experienced. You get two guys super drunk and you watch Bad Boys 2 and you reenact it with your remote and go, yeah, this is awesome, you know. So yeah, the movie, it definitely tells you what it's doing in that way. Anything else I wanted to say? We covered like broad social messages.
Or like the
homage,
the reference to the jumping over the fence.
Oh yeah. There's a couple things that, you know, yeah, the jumping over the fence is, I believe the exact line is in Spaced, Hot Fuzz, and Shaun of the Dead, where he says, "What's the matter? Never jumped over a fence before?" And
never taken a shortcut.
Oh, is that what it is? Yeah. But yeah, he jumps over a fence in Spaced. I remember that much. And of course, in Shaun of the Dead, the fence falls over when he jumps over it. In this one, he jumps like 5 fences as if making up for Shaun of the Dead.
Flip on the last one.
And then Nick Frost just crashes through the fence when he tries. So yeah, and then there's also, he says, "What are you thinking, pub?" Which is of course said several times throughout Shaun of the Dead. So couple direct references back to that movie, and it's interesting because in the interim between these podcasts, I did watch like an hour-plus long interview that Edgar Wright did out of school, and it was pretty cool because he talks about how he has the like exact same staff on everything. Like, he just brings the same people to everything he does. The editors of he was like, the editor of Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz is one of the editors from Spaced, and then the other editor from Spaced he uses on the next film, which is Scott Pilgrim. So it's like he writes them all, he gets the same people, and apparently, you know, all those quick cut scenes, because people were asking him, you know, everything you've worked on has this distinct editing style where there's all these quick cuts, like, are those like the editor, like how much of that is your decision? And he's like, those are actually in the script.
Yeah,
like it's written cut to like all these quick cuts and stuff. So yeah, it's definitely interesting.
It wouldn't. There's no way you could do that without having it.
But you could not write that into a script if you weren't directing that movie.
Yeah.
There's no possible fucking way you could write that into a script and have the director and editor like know what you meant unless they talk to you about it directly. So yeah, that's definitely like an Edgar Wright staple.
You know, it's funny because in the TV series I was just shooting, we had in one of the episodes there was supposed to be a montage scene that I had come up with, and then another guy was writing the episode, and we discussed it as being an Edgar Wright-esque montage scene where we do the super quick cuts and would be cutting between all these things, and no one really relayed that to the director of the episode or anything, so it's completely like lame and not that at this point. Like, we've edited it and everything. I'm like, we completely, because I guess he didn't write it well enough to make that clear, so we completely lost that aspect of it, where now it's just kind of like this mediocre montage. You can't do it without the
sound effects.
Exactly.
You know.
But it would have been impossible, like, incredibly hard to shoot what we had imagined in the first place, though, but yeah.
Definitely interesting
that those things.
that we've just made the point. You can't write that kind of thing unless you're directing and editing it, like, and there's not enough communication. So yeah, great case in point. Great live. This is how you know you're making, like, you're getting there in your career, is that you've got like direct parables to things we talk about in a film analysis.
Like, oh, I shot something like that like a month ago.
So yeah, that's most of what I can think to say about Hot Fuzz. There's a lot of characters in this movie, but I wouldn't say that they don't feel as real as Shaun of the Dead, but that also might just be because Shaun of the Dead is like a contemporary, like it's a bunch of young people in a big city, and that's kind of a lot more relatable than, you know, a bunch of weirdos out in the country. But they did say in that interview, he talks about how they went out and interviewed shitloads of like police and stuff from the countryside to try and, get ideas for this movie. They did a lot of research. There's apparently commentary tracks on the DVDs where they sit down with the cops that they interviewed and did commentary with them on the movie. So that's an interesting sort of commentary to do. They also said, like, this. I mentioned this to you in the movie. The scene where they're trying to catch the swan is based on a true police account where they were called in to catch some swan that had escaped, and it was just like, what the fuck are we doing, kind of thing. So there's definitely a lot of elements of reality, but most of the characters do seem kind of cartoony or caricature-esque, but it's also because there's so many of them packed into this.
And they're in this surreal town. It's not supposed to be realistic at all in that place.
Right, but at the same time, when you have a whole council chanting, the greater good, it's a little cheesy, There's definitely that.
Cheesy. It has the same, like in Shaun of the Dead, where it would build up this tense scene and then disperse it with comedy, like immediately. It does the same thing in Hot Fuzz, where all of a sudden they make a joke or make a cheesy line to make it go, oh yeah, and then it's like not all that serious.
Definitely with the murder scenes, there's a bit more, but the movie has more throughout. More dramatic or tonal scenes. Like, it's definitely a more tonal movie in general. Whereas,
but then there's always like some ridiculous overblown gore to make like the death scenes, kind of hilarious and awesome at the same time as being like a serious thing.
Yeah, the deaths. Well, the sheer goriness is like where the movie gets its, because it is kind of scary and unsettling because you're watching a movie that's just kind of like funny and whatever, and then all of a sudden someone gets like horrifically, gruesomely murdered, and you're like, Jesus, fuck,
hell.
Like this shit just got real.
And then they just blow it off like it didn't happen. It's like that guy's head exploded. Like holy shit.
There's definitely. And the most obvious scene of like just fucking with you is at the end where it's like they've wrapped up all the bad guys, everyone's laughing, and then fucking Danny gets shot and the place explodes.
Ridiculous.
Just so the landmine can have a purpose.
The most pointless part of that movie to me.
I feel like it was just made to like throw you off again. Just and of course because Nick Frost has to appear to die and then have a time skip like. The same exact thing. That's true. They both have a 1 year later, and then you find out Nick Frost is okay. Like, the same exact thing.
Sort of okay in Shaun of the Dead.
Yeah, in Shaun of the Dead, he's
not really
he's a zombie, but he's still... I mean, is he that different than he was? Like, that's kind of the joke, is...
Still playing PS2.
He was basically a fucking stupid zombie to begin with. But, yeah. And in this one, he's just fine. But, yeah. So... the next film that we'll do for Edgar Wright will be Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. I'm excited for that because I don't think I ever caught the entire movie. I feel like I missed the very beginning.
What the hell?
And I only saw it on TV. And the comics are like my favorite thing in the universe. So definitely excited.
Oh, another thing, the other guy from Black Books was in that movie.
Which the one who's like, nobody ever tells me nothing. That guy. Yeah.
Well, he was just the guy behind the counter.
Yeah.
Through most of it, but yeah, that was the other guy from Black Books, and I was like, huh, I'm seeing a connection here. But I guess BBC people.
Of course. And that's all. We actually managed to go longer than Shaun of the Dead somehow. Although I'm sure I have to edit some things out. But yeah, good.
Annotations.